Welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to alter a commercial pattern piece in order to accommodate a fuller bust. Commercial patterns tend to make patterns that are more suited for a B cup. So if you're larger than a B cup, you may need to make some alterations in order to have the bust line fit you a little bit better. So I'm going to show you using the pivot method on how to create extensions so this area should accommodate you better. So let's get started and I'll show you exactly what you need in order to do this. To make the alterations to your pattern, you're going to need the following items. First thing is we're going to need our pattern envelope and pattern pieces, some paper, something that's bigger than your pattern pieces you'll be working with, some tape, your flexible tape measure, some straight pins, some scissors, sewing gauge, and 2 different color markers or pencils. I also like to use a piece of cardboard that I'm going to be putting under my paper that I'm going to be working with. So it needs to be something slightly larger. I just don't have it on the table. So let's get started and figuring out how we can do our measurements. If you're larger than a B cup, you're going to need 2 sets of measurements. The first one is going to be your upper bust. So that's going to be if your arms are hanging down, it's going to be the crease from your armpit to your torso. So right here. Upper bust. And we're going to say in my example, that's 32.5 inches. And then you're going to do your full bust. So this is the fullest part of your bust. And for both of these measurements, you're making sure you're doing the circumference. You're going around the whole body, so around the back and around the front. So the fullest part of the bust, we'll do full bust, and we'll say in my example that's going to be 35.5 inches. Okay, so once you have these 2 measurements, then we're ready to consult the back of our envelope. Just make sure when you do your measurements, you're not wearing bulky clothes. You're making sure to keep your tape measure flat and parallel to the floor, and sometimes it's easier to have a friend help you out to get these measurements. So now that we have this, we can go ahead and look at that back of the envelope. Using the body measurements found on the envelope, we're going to be finding our bodice size using our upper bust and our waist circumference. The reason why we're using the upper bust instead of the full bust is because we want to make sure that the pattern is going to fit in our shoulders. And that way we don't have to worry about any alterations there. We just have to do the alterations for the full bust. So looking at this, for me I'm 32.5, and let's say my waist is a 25, so that would give me a size 10. So I'm going to cut out my bodice piece using the size 10 pattern. Now if in your example, let's say you're a 33 in your upper bust and the 26, I would go ahead and do the larger size instead of trying to do the smaller size and make it work. So it's only going to just be a little bit bigger. But in my case, I'm going to go ahead and cut out the size 10. After you cut out your bodice pieces, the first thing you're going to do is press them. And make sure that you don't get your iron too hot because the tissue paper is very delicate. I just have it warm, and you're going to be doing your front and your back. So I'm going to be showing you the steps on how to do this with the front piece, but the same thing is going to be repeated on your back piece as well. So after I have it pressed, I'm going to take my cardboard, place my sheet that I'm going to be doing my alterations on top of that, and then my pattern goes on top of that. Now you'll notice in this particular case, I'm not putting my pattern all the way to the edge. It's kind of off center. And the reason why I'm doing it like that is because the alteration that we're going to be using, the pivot method, is we're just going to be adding to the side and to the armhole here. We're not worried about the center front or the neckline or the bottom part here. So that's why you don't really need to have that large of a piece of a paper, just something that kind of covers this area here. So once I have that, and the nice thing about doing this method is that we don't have to worry about destroying the pattern and cutting it up and worrying about the grain line and all that kind of stuff. We're just doing a few little alterations here. Is I'm going to take my pattern and get my straight pins. And I like to put it through, this is why I like the cardboard, because I can just put my straight pin right through the paper into the cardboard and hold it. Just do a few here. And then I'm going to take one of my markers, in this particular case I'm going to do black, and on my work paper here, I'm just going to do an outline of my pattern. Let me just remove this. And you can see there's my outline. So if I replace my pattern here, it's very easy for me to line up exactly where it needs to be. So now we're going to do a little calculation and find out how much we're actually going to be adding to the side so we can make the bust a little fuller in this area. You're going to go back to your measurements you had taken earlier, and you're going to compare these to the bust measurements in the pattern that you cut out. So you're going to look back on the back of the pattern envelope, and for my example, size 10, the bust measurement on the envelope is 32.5, which coincidentally is the same size as this. So we'll say bust on pattern, and this is for size 10, is 32.5 inches. My full bust measurement is 35.5. So with my current size 10 pattern, the bust line is this. I need it to be this. So the difference between the two is 3 inches. Now I'm going to take this 3 inches, so this is what I need to add in order to increase the bust line for it to be the fullness that I need it. So if I have my front pattern, my back pattern, that's 2 patterns that I'm doing my bodice, each of them has 2 sides. There's 2 sides in the front, 2 sides in the back, so that's 4 sides total. I'm going to take my 3 inches and I'm going to divide it by 4. Because I'm just adding a little bit to each side and I want to do it equally. 3 divided by 4, another way to write this, 3/4, and that's what it is. 3 divided by 4 is 3/4 of an inch. So that's my magic number. That's what I'm adding to each of my side seams. Now, for example, if I cut out the pattern that was just a little bit bigger, let's say I cut out the size 12. I do the same thing. My bust size in my pattern is 34 inches. My full bust is still 35.5. The difference between that is 1.5 inches. I take 1.5, I divide it by 4, and so my magic number is going to be 3/8 of an inch. So if I was doing the size 10, I'm adding 3/4 of an inch to each side, but if I was doing size 12, I would add 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go off of this number since this is the size that I cut out, and we'll go back to our pattern piece. I'm going to take my bodice pattern piece, and on each of my pieces I want to mark where the seam allowance is on some parts because I need to know where that is. So I'm going to do it in this area up here. So this is the shoulder, the neckline, the armhole, and the side. So right up here I'm going to mark out my seam allowance in this corner here, and it's already built into the pattern, so all I need to do is just do a couple of lines. And I know my seam allowance for this pattern is 5/8 of an inch, which is common for most commercial patterns. So I'm just going to use my sewing gauge, and I have a different color marker so it'll show up a little bit better. Going to mark out 5/8 of an inch. So that's 5/8 of an inch from this edge, and then I'm going to go in 5/8 of an inch from this edge. So I just need to know where these 2 points intersect. So it looks like it's right about here. So right where they intersect, I'm just going to do a little crosshair like that. So there's my mark there, and then I'm going to do the same thing down here. So 5/8 of an inch from this side, and then 5/8 of an inch from this side. All right. So just do another one so I know where they intersect. About right there. All right, so once we have that, we can go back with our pattern and take it to our worksheet. So now I'm back to my worksheet area, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sewing gauge and I'm going to move my little slider till I get the measurement that I got for my last calculation. So in my example, my calculation was 3/4 of an inch. So whatever your magic number was, that's what we're going to mark on our slider here. So what I'm going to do is, in this area here, I'm going to line up one side and then mark 3/4 of an inch away from my side seam area up here. So there's my mark right there. I'm then going to grab my pattern and I'm going to line it back up with my black marker. So for this area here with my marker, I'm using a different color, so that way I'll be able to distinguish the difference. So I'm going to line it up. That looks pretty good. Then I'm going to take a straight pin, put it through the mark I made on my pattern. I made a little dot so I know where to put it. Then I'm going to pivot this pattern until this side seam of my pattern matches up with the mark I just made. So I'm just going to move it over like that, and I'll just stick a pin in to hold it. Now I'm going to use my marker and I'm going to draw a line where my new armhole lies. So I'm just going to follow along the outside here and mark the new armhole. After drawing the new armhole line, you're going to remove your straight pin and you're going to stick it in now this mark that you made before next to the side seam in the armhole. So I'm going to stick it there. I'm going to remove this one. Now I'm going to pivot it again because I want to make sure that this bottom portion of my side seam is going to again meet my black line. So like that. I'll stick a pin in. And now I'm going to draw my new side seam. After your new side seam is drawn, go ahead and remove your pins and put your pattern back to the original black marks. Once you have everything lined up, you can go ahead, tape your pattern again to the black marks. But what you're going to be doing is cut out your pattern, but when you get to where you have your red lines or whatever color that you did your alterations on, you're going to cut along that because that is going to be your new armhole and your new side seam. So you can see here, we extended it right here at the top where the bust line is going to be, and that's how you create your extension. So I'm going to go ahead and tape this, and then I'm going to grab my scissors. And again, this is all staying the same. This is why it's kind of nice to do the pivot method because we don't have to worry about these darts moving or anything like that. I'm going to cut along my red lines, and then up here around the neckline, this is all going to stay the same. So this is going to become my new pattern. Also, don't forget to make sure that you still have any marks, any notches you have. You're definitely going to want to transfer them to your red lines, and just make sure that everything else stays the same. So here's my completed front bodice piece, and you can see the extension sticking out here, and I went ahead and created my notches. So this is just the front, so I would still have to do this for the back, and you're just going to be doing the exact same method that we did for the front. And then once they're done, you just treat them as regular pattern pieces, but hopefully now they'll fit for a fuller bust.